A surprise attack on a Russian city just 25 miles from Ukraine's border by reportedly anti-Putin Russian insurgents. We are Russians, just like you, says a member of a group calling itself the Liberty of Russia Legion. They ominously declare everything is going according to plan. Ukrainian officials sharing video of Russian civilians fleeing Belgorod after the operation. And the head of Ukrainian intelligence issuing an online appeal for Russian soldiers to surrender from the, quote, upcoming meat grinder, saying it will get worse. Confuse and deceive the enemy. It would be playbook psychological operation strategy before Ukraine launches a counteroffensive. Fog up the war even more. Force the Russians to redeploy their limited forces. From Belgorod to Bakhmut. Videos are spreading on social media that counter the Russian narrative of victory in Bakhmut. This one, unverified, purports to show Ukrainian forces still operating within the city. And others, like this one from Roman Truckmets, a Ukrainian fighter we've been following, boasts of Ukrainian advances on the flanks of Russian forces in Bakhmut. We are on positions right now that were under Rus expletive occupation this morning, Roman says. This is a fantastic feeling. Here's the area in orange, the westernmost section of Bakhmut, is where the Russians claim they've dislodged the last of Ukraine's defenders. But then there are the blue patches to the north and south, areas where the Ukrainians say they've pushed back the Russians, semi-encircling them.
For whatever reason, whether the troops there are just now exhausted or whether they've lost so many troops they can't seem to hold either side, the Ukrainians have discovered that the sides of Bakhmut are much weaker for the Russians, and they're beginning to push them back.
The topographic map explains why Ukraine's gains may prove significant. Russia now holds the area in green, the low ground. Overlooking them, Ukrainian forces in the red area to the southwest of the city, the high ground. Terrain taken back by the Ukrainians in recent days.
So I just want to stop that right there. They're getting into a lot of disinfo. Bakhmut has fallen, right? And that's the end of the story. Now, the most significant part of that was what they told you in the beginning, right? Was you had 39 Russian nationals who signed up to fight for the Ukrainian army with Ukrainian army uniforms using American tanks and military weapons invade a city called Belgorod. Now, the Russian security forces killed them all. That's the part of the story they're not telling you. That they sent in a suicide squad of 39 Russian nationals who were, I guess, living in Ukraine, and then decided to sign. They didn't like the Kremlin and the current government. They probably, they're Nazis, right? 39 Ukrainian Russian Nazis that went into Belgorod to take over the city, launch an attack on the city. All of them were killed. So it's basically a suicide squad, right? And and so then they go into this whole thing where Bakhmut has fallen, and so they're trying to say, well, that city hasn't fallen to the Russians. But the real story here is the fact that they're not telling you. The real story is the fact that you sent in 39 basically Russian Ukrainian mercenaries with American equipment and tanks and weapons to a Russian city. How do you think that's going to play at the Kremlin? How do you think that's going to play with Vladimir Putin and the rest of the Russians in Russia, right? Where you got basically a bunch of Ukrainian Mercs running into a Russian city with American weapons, killing Russians and trying to take over this city. See, that's the part they're not telling you, and that's the part. That's where this thing starts to get really, really, really dangerous, right? Because they're basically where people don't realize the seriousness of it in America, right? Where they're giving, anybody who wants to fight and they're giving these groups, these mercenaries, American weapons to go into Russian cities, right? And you've killed like 100,000 Russian soldiers in the past year, right? So they look at it like, well, basically, they look at it as though you're killing Russians with American weapons. You're creating proxy armies to kill Russian citizens. That's how they look at it, right? And I'm going to play a quick clip from Russian television just to show you what I mean.
Если делать, даже, у меня вообще на самом деле становиться страной террористом, извините, это плохо не для них, это плохо для нас самих, если мы вдруг почувствуем себя страной террористов. Поэтому я, может быть, за то, чтобы по Лондону ядерный...
So here you see, I just wanted to play that, right? It's from this channel called Russian Disinfo. And it's just, they play a lot of what goes on Russian, news, like their CNN. And the guy said, listen, we don't, basically what they were saying was, I'm gonna wrap this up. He said, listen, we don't need to, they were talking about basically the same way NATO and America is giving weapons to Ukraine. They were saying, well, fuck it, we should give weapons to everybody that don't like them, right? Anybody in the world that don't like them, let's just start giving them weapons and intelligence and start having them attack, France, Germany, US, everybody. And so the dude stopped him and he said, no. He said, listen, we should just go ahead, that would make us terrorists. He said, what we need to do is nuke London. The government should nuke London or whatever. That's what he said. There's a prophecy that London gets nuked by Russia. So I believe it's getting ready to come true. But besides the point. But yeah, so he says, no, we're not terrorists. Russia is not a terrorist state. We don't sponsor terrorism. He said we need to go ahead and just nuke like London, Germany, London, Berlin. And if they nuke them, then they got to nuke the US because that's an attack on NATO, right? And so that's what they're talking about on Russian CNN. You know what I mean? Like that's how, I guess that's the temperature in the country. These people feel like their way of life and their safety and security is under attack. While they're feeding people in America, and silly Negroes, they're feeding them like this bullshit news and LeBron James, he's not the greatest of all time, it's Michael Jordan and all of this shit, right? And, transsexuals and this and that, where these people are talking about nuking London, nuking Berlin, nuking, basically the US. And it's starting to be a nightly thing, right? And that's just in public. That's on TV in the coffee shops, right? They're getting prepared for like World War III and nuking the whole world. So I just thought that was interesting. It just kind of shows you where we at in this process, where we're really on the, I don't know what to say. I get tired of people saying, oh, we're on the edge. I think we're way beyond the edge at this point. We're way beyond the edge. I saw a story today where they gave senators and shit like that satellite phones in case the phones go down. So I'll post a link to that too, but they may know something that you don't. So anyway, that's all I got.